I'd like to call to order the Friday, February 8th, 2019 meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board of Directors. Let's see. We're going to do roll call after closed session. Okay, so we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mayor Carbone, would you lead us in the pledge? Thank you. We do have a closed session today. Council, would you let the public know what we're going to be discussing?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Item 4A, Conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court Case Number 17CV4540. That's a pending litigation matter. Item 4B, also Conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court Case Number 18CV871, pending litigation matter. And finally, 4C, Conference with Legal Counsel, potential litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9D4. That's one item there.
Thank you. On my agenda, it's item number 3. But other than that, I agree with everything you said. Is there any member, that's okay, is there any member of the public who would like to comment on any of the items we're going to be discussing in closed session? All right, seeing none, I'll close public comment. We will recess to closed session and return as soon as we are finished with it. Welcome back into open session. And Council, would you do our announcement?
Yes,
please?
thank you, Chair. Members of the board and public, the board met in closed session under items 3A, B, and C. 3A is Conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court Case Number 17CV4540, pending litigation. There's nothing to report from that case. The board did hear from counsel as to the status of the matter. Item 3B, Conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court Case Number 18CV871, also pending litigation. The board heard from counsel concerning the status of that matter, and there's nothing to report out. And finally, 3C, conference with legal counsel, one item of potential litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9D4. The board heard from counsel concerning that matter, and there's nothing to report out.
Thank you. And before we do announcements and correspondence, would the clerk please call the roll?
Supervisor Parker? Here. Supervisor John Phillips? Here. Supervisor Adams? Here. Councilmember Gagliotti? Here. Councilmember Frank O'Connell?
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley?
Here.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa?
Here.
Mayor Ian Oglesby?
Here.
Councilmember John Wizard?
Here.
Mayor Marianne Carbone?
Here.
Mayor Joe Gunter? Councilmember Cynthia Garfield? Councilmember Jan Ramers?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Now, wow, on this agenda, oh, it's way up there. All right. Oh, that's why John was saying 4, because he has a different agenda than I have. Okay. And now I have that one. All right, let's do acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence, please.
Yes, Chair, just a couple of quick announcements. It's the first meeting for Councilwoman Lisa Berkeley from the City of Marina and Councilmember John Gagliotti from the City of Delray Oaks. Welcome. A couple of quick items. The inaugural DART meetup meeting is going to be on Tuesday, February 12th. The DART is the Drones, Automation, Robotics, and Technology. So my understanding is that there are not quite a large number of folks that are going to be there. This is going to be in our colleague City of Marina Airport location. It's at UCM Best Center. Yes, it will be. If anybody's interested, please see Josh Metz. Number 2, Fort Ord Community Cleanup Outreach Events. Last week there were over 80 folks that participated in the tour, and this was actually a groundwater issue. This was, I understand Colonel Ford joined you but didn't want anybody to know. I'm making sure everybody did know that he was there. I know that there are a couple of other items coming up, and some of the newer board members might want to mark these down, because the guided tour of the impact area is going to be on May the 4th. That's right outside of Seaside. That's an area you might want to put that on your schedule to join in. So look for that. Bill Collins from the Army is available for any notes about that. And then the impact area bus tour is going to be Saturday, July 13th. So if you want to put that on your calendar and participate, particularly for new board members haven't enjoyed those trips in the past. So, Chair, that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda, I believe. Are there any board members who would like to pull any of the items for question or comment? Not seeing any arms waving. Any member of the public wishing to pull at 7E? Okay. I would entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda minus 7E. Thank you. Motion by Phillips, seconded by Carbone. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Passes unanimously. Yes, Mr. Cheshire, what would you like to say about 7E?
Ron Cheshire with the Monterey Santa Cruz Building Construction Trades Council. Before I start my criticism of the report, I will say that as an agency, FORA can only deal with the information it gets. Okay? And I have yet to see some of the information it does receive. But we are very skeptical about what is taking place in regards to construction and such out within the Fort Ord or within your jurisdiction. It was reported that you had 143,960 hours worked by 2,156 workers over a period of 3 months of October 1st to December 31st. If you had 2,156 construction workers out there, it would look like Yasgur's farm in the middle of the Woodstock deal in '69. The averages I gave you in my report are just those, averages. If each worker worked during that time, they would have worked 1 hour a day. What we believe is taking place is that FORA is receiving duplicate information. Certified payrolls are given on a weekly basis. A worker that works 12 weeks is one worker, but there's 12 certified payrolls submitted. So it could be maybe 12 people. All we want you to know is that there aren't 2,156 workers out there making a full monthly pay every month, and that they're running off to their homes and living happily ever after. It's a compilation of basically what's taking place. Some workers may be working a full month, some may be out there for a day and such. But again, we still think that there are duplicate reports coming in. And Ms. Damon can only deal with the information she receives. And if she's receiving bad information, what's the old saying? Garbage in, garbage out. So we've offered our services to maybe take a look and see how these could be looked at in different lights, so you get a real true feeling of what's taking place out here. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hulmar, do you want to, is there something, what do you recommend we do about the prevailing wage report based on this? Anything?
And I will talk with Robert Norris and Sherry Damon about this. We continue to work with all of the trades whenever we can, and Ron Cheshire has a pointed way of expressing his interest and concern in this area. We have no qualms about sitting down with Ron and working with him on the information we get, and continuing to work with the jurisdictions on getting us improved information, because I think Ron's correct that if we get better information and how we phrase that and send it back to the board, that would give the board better information as well.
So shall we then just table this report to another meeting rather than accepting it? Or
I would simply receive the report, Chair, and ask for staff to come back with recommendations on how we might improve the quality of the information.
all right, so it's been recommended that we receive the report. I think it would be important to note that there were concerns raised about it, and I think it's appropriate to direct staff to look at how the accuracy or the way the report is put together can be improved. Anyone like to make a motion along those lines? Thank you. Motion by Gunter, second by Adams. Any further discussion? Yes.
On the question, sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair. On the question, I share those concerns, so I want to put down as a board member sharing those concerns.
Thank you. Any other comments? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. It passes unanimously. Thank you for that. We'll move now to business items. That's number 8 on our agenda, and the 8A is issues related to, actually that's it, 8A, 1 and 2. So we'll start with the transition plan progress report. Mr. Hulmar, do you want to set this up?
Sure, Chair. I don't know if this is coming through on the video, but I don't know that the speaker sound could not be turned up a bit, Jen.
Hello. I think you could probably hear me.
Okay. Well, then Sherry, why don't you go ahead?
Alrighty. I'm going to speak to item 8A little I. This is your 2018 transition plan. We're going to, instead of calling these updates, we're going to call these progress, I think is the new thing because we are now in the implementing phase of your 2018 transition plan. So here is an overview of the meetings. We're going to talk about the to-do list that's in your packet and what your administrative staff is going through and what we're doing to try to keep the process, the implementing process, on track. We're going to talk about the facilitators a little bit, and then the list of concerns. So the newer board members won't recall, but those of you who were here during the December hearings adopting the 2018 transition plan, there were some concerns that were articulated during those hearings, and this is the follow-on to that, to make sure that staff and your facilitator team and your own administrative staff, that everybody has a comprehensive list of concerns. If there's anything that we missed during that process, now would be the time, and that's what we're hopeful to get today. So with that, I've been on the road, and Michael Hulemard has been on the road. And I thought 2019 might be a little slower year for me. Last year was a lot of work on getting the transition plan, compiling everything. I was before this board every month, and it is most certain I will be before this board, or somebody will be before this board every month from here on out as we go through the implementing process, because there are lots of things. This is the weedy part of the process. The minutia, the details. So we met with LAFCO. We've been meeting on a staff level with the City of Seaside, the County of Monterey, the Army regulators, and the Administrative Committee. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. The Fort Ord Subcommittee has been hearing some items relative to transitioning and all the little things, Delray Oaks, individual meetings. So we have been busy out there. I'd like to go over the to-do list. So you will hear about the to-do list, and I'd like to go over kind of the elements of the to-do list and not the entire to-do list. The entire to-do list, as it is currently drafted, is in your packet, so you can kind of see what it is. It's not intended to be an exhaustive, every single little tiny thing. It is supposed to be a compendium and a resource as we move through the implementing process to make sure we note the things that are really important to our jurisdictions, and that if there's something technical that we have to do, that we've captured it so that it doesn't fall through the cracks. That's what this to-do list is. And there are some essential elements to this to-do list. And I'm going to start with this is just the first line item under your environmental services, sometimes called ESCA. And you'll note we have this pound and then some numbers. Those numbers are cross-references to the contract matrix that's in the 2018 transition plan. It's designed so that for this one-line item, as your respective staffs are going through the to-do list, they can say, oh, I know, I can go to this contract, this contract, this contract. This is where I find it in the contract matrix. This is how I can access it easily. So that's what those numbers are. It's a little confusing if you don't know what's going on. Agency is pretty self-explanatory. That's who we think at this point the main parties are that are leading the charge for those line items. And you can see there's a shorthand that's employed there, county/seaside, seaside/FORA. That means most likely it's going to be a couple of us working together to implement it. And each one of these line items under the task, so the task is what we have to do. There might be 15 things that aren't on this list that are behind these things to make those things happen. Setting up the meetings, making sure we've got the right people in the room, making sure that everybody understands the agreements, the nature and extent of the obligations, those kinds of things. So again, this list is not, the task list is not designed to be overly exhaustive, so not too weedy, but just weedy enough so that we don't lose some of the really important things. I know, weedy, it's one of those technical legal terms, what can I say? And then over here on the right-hand column is your completion date. When we're done with that, we get to put a nice fat little date in there, and we're going to go through an example of that in a minute. And then what is not shown on this slide, because the slides are only 8.5 by 11, but this spreadsheet is a bigger spreadsheet than that. There's a column on the right-hand side for notes. And that, again, is for staff. It's for us. It's to remind us that we might have to look at budgetary items as we move forward in terms of planning for our last year. And in particular on this, one of the line items on the to-do list under this is your pollution liability insurance policy. It has a $500,000 self-insured retention amount. We currently have $267,000 set aside in the FORA accounts for that. So I've got a note on my version of this list for my help, $500,000 question mark, agreement, property tax. How do we deal with that? Budget adjustment. And that's something that gets raised as we move through, again, those discussions. So I'm going to show you the second part of it, because your FORA staff on the administration, we are not sitting still. We've already, and this board has already taken some of the implementing steps to implement the 2018 transition plan. It adopted a notice of intent to terminate the CalPERS contract. So you can see there, the agency was the FORA board. And you can see here, done. Yay! We have something that has been completed. You'll note also, even though this is a completion date column, there's some notes in here that it says no later than. That's, again, another reminder. Maybe I should have moved it over to the notes side, but I thought it was important to have it right there in the dates, just to remind us that this board has to take some subsequent actions in order to actually terminate the CalPERS contract. It has to happen, no later than January 11th, 2020. So it has to happen no later than 1 year after that notice of intent to terminate. So just making sure we don't lose the dates, we don't forget somehow as we go through and we're negotiating and things are flying here and there, and we just don't want to forget the key dates. We don't want to have to start over on things like that. You'll note also there are things that support each line item that aren't listed here, and today's a good example. So one of the items on your agenda today is item 8A 2i, which deals with part of this line item. So during the last year's hearings, I believe our executive officer was directed to get some outside consultant help to help with the staffing transition, how we do what needs to be done between now and 2020, and how we also create a transition for the staff in a responsible way. And so that is what item 8A 2i will deal with. But you'll notice that's not on this list. It just says staffing plan, because that contract amendment is part of what the executive officer needs in order to bring back this item to your board. So you still have a whole bunch of stuff you have to do in order to help with a successful transition, and all of those things aren't on this list. This list, the to-do list, also tries to capture things that are coming up that we don't know yet who is going to get it or what's going to happen. Again, this is kind of along the lines of that reminder. Let's not let it fall through the cracks. Like one of the things that came up during the staffing and the CalPERS termination is how and who maintains personnel files post-2020. So we had to send our staff and our current staff and our past staff letters saying we've taken the first step to terminate the CalPERS contract. And those letters would normally, in an agency that was continuing on, would be put either in a personnel file or in a CalPERS file. For an agency that's going away, however, where are those letters? Where is the proof that that noticing occurred? Is it maintained by a successor? Who's going to maintain those records? Is it going to be CalPERS, which was my thought? And they said, no, we don't want it. So again, we're just trying to capture those issues and then come forward with, hopefully, to address those as we move forward through the implementing process. So that is how your to-do list is built. And your staff, your administrative staffs, have been working with this to-do list as they have been working through the contract matrix, trying to make sure they understand the nature and extent of the contracts that each jurisdiction will have to become familiarized with. And so this is designed to be an asset and a help to them. So we have facilitators. Meet the facilitators. Kendall Flint and Stephen Flint. They are employees of the Joint Powers Agency, Regional Governmental Services. And you should understand that there are two contracts that we have with Regional Governmental Services, RGS. One is the facilitation contract, and this board authorized the executive officer to spend up to $100,000 on facilitation services to implement the transition plan. And then there is a second contract, which is what we are going to be talking about under item 8A II, which is part of the HR consulting services. It's a different part of the contract. Kendall Flint comes to us with great qualifications. This is a husband and wife team, and some of you may have met with them already. They have started their outreach meetings. They have started to attend meetings. They were at our last board meeting, and they apologize that they can't be here today, but they are out of the area and could not make this particular board meeting. But you should expect to see them in the future at the board meetings and in other places. Stephen has a huge amount of land use experience, and Kendall is communications and strategic outreach. Their resumes are in your packet. Facilitators have provided us with a work plan summary for their first 2 to 3 months. Basically, those comprise of meetings with FORA, bringing themselves up to speed and doing document review. So lots of document review. It's very, all things FORA can be overwhelming at times. So they are working their way through that. They've started meeting with the member agencies to identify each agency's key issues that maybe were not raised during the public hearing, but which they've become aware of. That's a common thing that facilitators do to make sure that they have a good understanding of the parties, where they are, what their issues are. They are meeting with LAFCO staff and the ex officio agencies in the coming week, and then they will be working on a key issues memo to review with FORA and to work through some of those issues with the administrative committee as we work through implementing again, because your administrative committee is working through very collaboratively and cooperatively to try to understand A, the contracts, and B, things that maybe from a staff level there's consensus or agreement on that can be taken up to the appropriate decision makers in each organization. And they are estimating that February 27th or March 6th or March 6th would be a special meeting to go through some of those key issues with the administrative committee. So this is the list of concerns, and I've taken a liberty of trying to consolidate them into a form that will fit on one slide. And they fall into like 5 categories. One is the jurisdictional issue, the LAFCO FORA jurisdictional issue. And these are issues that I heard not only before the board, but also in our subsequent meetings. So we did approve the 2018 transition plan, but not every issue is fully resolved. We are hopeful they are resolved by agreement, but they might not be. And they fall generally, and the concerns are generally jurisdictional on who can assign and what that looks like to participate post-2020. The survivability of documents, so we talked about that quite a bit during the hearings. The base reuse plan, does that survive post-2020? What does that look like? How does that work with the jurisdictions moving forward? What policies are required to be complied with post-2020? So called that survivability of documents, and in particular for the master resolution, the prevailing wage requirement, which is something of great interest to Mr. Cheshire over there and many others on the base, to make sure that our first generation construction projects continue to pay prevailing wage. But other issues are the provision and the requirement in the base reuse plan to build 20% affordable housing. You know, if there is no base reuse plan and there is no requirement, do you still have to build 20% affordable housing? And do we still need 20% affordable housing? Do we still want that as policy? So that's kind of an issue that I've heard. The continuation of the money, the community facilities district, and in particular, capturing the revenues on already entitled development that's not easy to replace. Heard a lot of issues related to financial risk. So post-2020 financial risk. How do you deal and who is responsible for financial shortfalls? And that would be like the indemnification litigation fund that's in the 2018 transition plan. There were lots of questions about that. What happens if there's not enough money in that fund? Who's responsible? Who pays? CalPERS, how do we handle it if there's a $10 million or $12 million or $15 million actuarial analysis, which we don't have, but we have started that ball in motion. So we should know that within not hopefully too distant future, 6 months or so, and other contingent liabilities. And I don't know what they are because they're contingent liabilities. They could come up at any time, but if there is an incident that causes, let's say there's an insurance issue, how you allocate, how you pay for it, how you allocate the self-insured retention fund amongst the parties, who is it, and how do you address it? And finally, post-governance structure. How do you manage ongoing litigation that might occur post-2020? Who manages it and how? The habitat, which we are hopeful, if we have enough folks to finish that HCP process, we're hopeful that that will actually have a consolidated base-wide approach and structure, so this will fall out. And many of these issues might fall out. Again, during the adoption of the transition plan, we were hopeful these issues will be addressed by agreement between the parties. But as I said in my staff report, and I said during the hearings, you have litigation that might have to happen in order to resolve some or all of these, if worst case scenario, or you might have a piece of legislation that addresses some of these or all of these issues. And at this point, we are, if there are additional issues that I missed during the adoption process, now is when I would hope to get those while we're still early enough in the implementing process so that we can try to figure out how that we can address those. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think this is a good time. This is the board agenda item that was requested in order to have board members, if you have thought of issues that need to be on this list or on the table, this is the time to bring those forward. So I'll start with having board members bring those things up, and we'll ask for public input as well, and then we'll go to the 8A little eyes, 2 eyes. So yeah, great. Okay, board members with thoughts on issues that you want to be sure are discussed. Yes.
So I'm just curious from my 2 colleagues if the Fort Ord Committee had the opportunity to review the list of concerns and or have a bit more county focused opportunity to think and respond.
I'll try to respond to that, and Supervisor Phillips can correct me if I get it wrong. But I think actually, Supervisor Adams, when you were still on the Fort Ord Committee, I think we decided that we should no longer discuss FORA transition issues in the Fort Ord Committee because those decisions were going to be being made by the full board. So we don't discuss them at the Fort Ord Committee.
Yeah, that's the position of our county. We want our full board to make decisions dealing with issues dealing with the transition.
That's right. So does that mean then that we as the Monterey County Board of Supervisors will have an opportunity to review the list of concerns and then discuss it as the Monterey County Board of Supervisors and list other things that we may feel are not being included yet?
I think, jurisdictions can handle it any way they like. This is something that we had talked about was going to be discussed. So I think for those of us who have been sitting at the table, I think we can bring these things forward. I think our staff is also in conversation with the consultants. So I think this is a less formal kind of attempt to just as we've been sitting through and listening to the transition discussions, are there any issues that were raised that haven't made it onto this list? So, sure. Anybody? Yes, Ms. Garfield.
Thank you, Chair. This does cover most of my list. It's slightly different framing, but I wanted to underscore some things that I think are of interest to all of us that may not pop out on that, and that one of them is particularly the litigation risk. Is what are we going to do about circumstances under which a litigation cost or settlement amount exceeds the money that's set aside. And so that's not been settled, but that one we clearly want. Now, it may mirror what was proposed for the CalPERS overages, but it may not. So it's just not settled. The consistency determination is an issue that comes up over and over again. And I think it relates closely to the survivability of the base reuse plan and master resolution. But in specific, I'm hearing people very interested in how do we know that the jurisdictions who currently have a master plan or development plan for their Fort Ord areas that's been approved and everybody agrees to it, and what stops anybody from, any entity, Delray Oaks, from deciding that they're going to build a casino as soon as FORA is over with? I don't understand that, and I'm not able to convey it to others how that is in fact has some continuity. So, for instance, what kind of development is allowed? What kind of density and locations differing from what we currently have an agreement on? Of great interest is the affordable housing commitments that have been made, and do they survive? And prevailing wage, and funding the Habitat Conservation Plan. Those are three things that come up over and over again. And as I read documents, I see that there are debts owed to FORA where they didn't collect on their share of a developer's fees. I think there was one where the county sold to a developer I may be reading this incorrectly, and there may have been subsequent information I'm missing. But what I read was that at one time the County of Monterey sold some property. The developer failed. In order to make the deal work, the price was lowered to zip. So FORA didn't get theirs, and it's sort of like gonna get theirs later. And then that developer went under. The new developer is contending that they don't owe that. So I'm wondering how do these things, are we going to leave money on the table? Or do these monies owed from county, I think Delray Oaks owes some cash, and a couple of others, how do they get zeroed out, paid? And then one last one's a vocabulary issue, is on the issue of property tax being encumbered for the CalPERS or the litigation or whatever. What exactly is it? Because the language in this just says property tax. It doesn't say whose property tax, or whether it's an increment, or whether it's everybody's. And so I just wanted to be clear that throughout here we need to specify exactly which dollars are going to be proposed to be encumbered. So thank you. That's my list, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring these up.
Thank you. Other board members with thoughts? Yes, Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ensure that there's a discussion around the gap in that liability insurance that Ms. Damon referenced, the $270,000 that should be $500. I appreciate that we're concerned about pensions and fulfilling CalPERS liabilities and obligations. But if we're going to be talking about funding a litigation defense fund, it would seem to me that we would fund the already established protection funds that we have or are obligated to fund fully. Additionally, I think that there needs to be some greater conversation around habitat conservation and management, and I realize that that's a slow process by which we often find ourselves at the whim of the federal government, which is never a fun place to be, regardless of your business. And so perhaps maybe just some more regular updates about where we are, or if we've received comments, what those comments are, if they're slow walking us, what just so that we stay on top of it as time gets nearer. Those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to bring up, and I'll continue to let others speak, but I think it's been brought up a couple of times and it's not on the list yet, so I want to make sure it gets there, and that is the financial commitments that FORA has to TAMC and MST. I think it's about $30 million to TAMC and about $8 million to MST. Probably, in hindsight, a portion of each developer fee payment should have gone to paying them as we went along. Anyway, I think we have to figure out how we're going to make that right, and figure out what the proportional payment is that we can make at this stage, rather than pushing our contribution to them always to the bottom of the list. And I wonder, I'm thinking maybe EPS or someone can kind of calculate out what that might be, so that we can get a sense for what some options might be. But I think we really need to make sure that we make good on that commitment. Sorry, Mr. Hoffa, and then, did you have a...
So, I mean, to speak to that, maybe even a more broader way, I think we need to kind of have a conversation about what we're not going to fund, because we know there's going to be $70 million approximately that we're going to be short funded because of the entitled projects not paying their fair share. So I think, honestly, we need to sit down with all of our sort of outstanding liabilities and have an honest conversation about what's not going to be paid for going forward. And that would include those, that would include habitat, that would include water, that would include roads, the whole shebang. I think we just need to look at that and figure out, okay, we got to reverse engineer this. We can't do it all. So what's not going to get done?
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Oglesby.
Thank you. I just want to agree with Director Hoffer. That's kind of like what I see when I see the concerns, and I know all the directors have their own personal pet peeves, and all of them are legitimate because they're things we were supposed to do over the last 24 years. But 2020, and we're sunsetting, we have a transition plan. As adults, we know something's not going to get done. So my thoughts is, what is the priority? And maybe we need to go through that again and have votes on that, because we're not going to agree on a priority, but we have to set a priority, and then what's left is what's left. Because I think you made a good point, Chair, when you said the monies we owe TAMC, how do we get it up? But we know why it keeps going to the bottom of the list of payments, because it's no money there. But once you pay them, what comes off your list to do? So I'm listening to all of these concerns. I think we just have to go back and prioritize and just admit that somehow we ran out of time, because all the jurisdictions need to prepare for after transition. And we need to get them that information as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Other board members? Yes, Mr. Gagliotti.
I just have two questions. One is the 20% housing requirement. That is also required at the state and county level too, right? So if FORA goes away, those would supersede, or those would take no. Okay. And then the second question was, in light in what Mayor Oglesby just brought up, is that and even Mr. Hoffa, what would be the forum then for us to do that prioritization? I mean, how would we do that? Because Delray Oaks, in a board meeting, or would it be a special meeting?
Mr. Hillmart, if you want to respond, I mean, one of the things in thinking about all of this, one of the things I made to myself was that we need to bring the 1920 budget and CIP early, March or April, and really have a thorough conversation about this, because it may not get resolved in one meeting, and we have to adopt the budget in June. So really leaving time for us to have that discussion. But I don't know, Mr. Hulmar, do you have other thoughts on that?
These are, most of these, and especially when you're choosing between what you're going to do or not do, those are policy decisions. They really are at this level. So that's why I said here, staff can make some recommendations and tell you what the options are, but this is really a board discussion. So that was all I was going to say.
So I think I'd like to weigh in, though, on the timing of it, because you might recall when we adopted the 2018 transition plan, we actually we were kind of thinking that the CIP would come in a little bit, and the final budgeting stuff would come in a little later than we normally do, because we are doing some additional studies to help inform the recommendation and the decisions for that prioritization conversation. We are anticipating it at staff and are moving forward on that kind of analysis. And I don't think it's going to be possible to bring that level of analysis to you in March, for example, or in April. It's probably going to be closer to the normal way, and it maybe even be a little later than the June, July timeframe is my strong suspicion. And I could be proven wrong, but some of them involve transportation studies, traffic studies. So our experience has not been that those studies always are provided right on time, because they're complicated. Okay. Thanks. Yes, Ms. Garfield.
Would it be premature to say, let's, at the finance committee, the first thing we need to do is get the numbers on what's owed for everything? Just make sure we really understand and have a placeholder for money owed to everybody, money owed in accounts receivable, money owed to FORA, and just really make sure we understand those and start creating funding placeholders for them, so we can start doing that, even though there are some things that aren't settled.
Yes, Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess we'll be busy at the Finance Committee. On that note, just for my own edification, I'm sure it's already been discussed. Where do future assets go on December 20th? If a check that is made out to the Florida Reuse Authority is received by whatever administrative entity receives mail, what happens to that? Where does it? Is there some mechanism, some formula by which it gets distributed? How is it collected? What account does it go to? Is it escrow? Is there interest?
It all depends on the type of asset that you're talking about, and what exactly the legislation has left for us is, if the Community Facilities District goes away, it goes away. So that stops. If FORA goes away, the tax increment benefit goes away. It doesn't get collected anymore. There will need to be, though, for some of the other assets where there will be some remnant ones, there will still need to be a decision made by this board in concert with one of the members for taking on that responsibility and obligation. We are looking at the possibility of working something out with the county in that regard, because there may be funds that are collected by the tax collector. Where will that money go? So that's to be determined, by and large.
So specifically, one example that comes to mind is if there's some pending litigation that extends out into 2022, and the successor of the Florida Reuse Authority receives a check for attorney's fees that's not related to CFD or property tax or any kind of land sale, is an administrative payment. Today, where do we anticipate that money going?
I don't have an immediate answer for you, but you recognize that there is there's a fund that's being requested by LAFCO that would cover certain things. There's John Giffen's personal, There,
I'm going to recommend the Kennedy, Archer, and Giffen count.
but
It's a trust, trust me.
but in some cases that might be the case if it's certain kinds of litigation issues. So I think that's still to be determined. That's something that we do have on our list of things to do. What you saw today were only 2 examples of a list that is quite long, that all of the members of the administrative committee are working with us to address. So it might be that City of Seaside stands up and ready to handle that administrative cost.
Thank you. Shall we take it out to the public? Anybody else want to identify an issue before we do that? Okay, I'll open it up to the public. Any member of the public wishing to comment on any of these outstanding issues that you feel that it would be important for FORA to resolve?
Noticed conspicuously missing is Delray Oaks. I mean, you only got like, what, 100 acres in there. City of Monterey's got about 100 acres. I just thought it'd be important that DRO be included in that. No problem.
And they have been contacted. Just thank you for that comment. The RGS team has outreached with Delray Oaks, and it was an oversight that they did not get included on the January 30th draft document.
Thank you. Any other member of the public with comments or questions? All right, I'll close public comment. Thanks, everyone. Anything else on the key issues before we move to 8A? Okay. All right, Sherry, do you get to
Aye.
do this? No, aye. There we are. But they're so small. That's why. It's not my item.
This next item, Chair, I will introduce. This is a 3-part item. It's 8AII. It's page 43 in your board report. There are 3 things we're asking, and that is that you accept this report that's presented by Regional Government Services. This is the original reason why we hired RGS. This was authorized by the board. The direction was given that the executive officer come up with methodology and a plan assisted by consultants. We went through a competitive process in selecting them. We had 5 or 6 different entities that we contacted. I think we had 3 that submitted. Robert Norris conducted a complete review and background. We did our reference checks. Turned out RGS was very highly recommended to do this kind of work. It appears as though not only did they do work in other parts of the state of California, but they're continuing to do work right here in Monterey and understood Monterey intergovernmental issues. So it was value to be able to add them to our team. Once we did hire them, they looked at drafting a scope of work, trying to figure out how we would address the major issues that confront this board with being able to do all of the things that are listed in our capital improvement program, complete the work that's already underway, and add in all of the work that we're trying to do under the transition as we start losing the top-notch people that we have on our staff. It's not going to be an easy proposition. The board members recognize that. I really appreciate your support in getting me the initial contract, $25,000, to get them in place, to do a scope, and to get moving on this. Just as a little bit of evidence of what I'm saying, just since we started this process, we lost Dominique to a much larger pay. Dominique left us just a short while ago and is now one of the deputy clerks, I believe, in Sunnyvale? No. City of Santa Clara? It's one of those places up there that buys all of our good people. We also, unfortunately, are announcing that Helen Rodriguez is going to be a controller over in Hayward starting next week. So we are already losing some of our top people to others in the area that are paying slightly more. We have a great a workload. The board members each year get a chance to look at what that is. And this year, in addition, we are also doing our 2-year review of our capital improvement program, which is good from the perspective that we are outlining a transition, and we'll have that additional information but we are also required to oversee what that consultant's doing and helping that consultant as they work with our other set of RGS consultants to help jurisdictions in the work that they have to do as well. So it's quite a bit of work. We're losing some of our best people, and I'm reassigning folks and not replacing, so that we have the cost savings that would pay for the costs associated with what's in this program. Just so you know, all of that is in the budget, not just as a $100,000 line item for these kinds of services that the board approved, but also that we're already doing our budget savings so that we're kind of prepared for wind down and have resources and assets available to the board to make the kind of priority decisions it mentioned on the last item. Most of my presentation Sherry did when she outlined what RGS this item 2 was going to be before, but there's a couple of more things I want to add, and that is that some board members, more than one, were concerned that we're starting to get into this personnel issue, and shouldn't that be handled by the executive officer, and why is the board making personnel decisions? Well, this is not about personnel decisions. I just want that understood. It's providing me as your rep and my work to try to keep the staff together to complete all of the other work, the resources I need to make that happen. In some cases, it will be because I'll need to reclassify positions, not just add resources, but reclassify. In some cases, I'll be asking people to work outside of their normal responsibilities. That might require a stipend or something else. In other cases, it's going to be crucial that we keep the talent we have as long as we can, if you want to get our HCP adopted and approved and implemented, which we have right on the edge of doing right now. If you want to make sure that we keep the coherent, cohesive staff we have doing environmental remediation, which is a technical set of things that are extraordinarily difficult to manage. I think Bill Collins, I think you would say that that's somewhat the case. It's not going to be easy. So those are the things that are encompassed in this report. That's what RGS is helping us to get framed, so that if there are other things later that we have to come back and say, you know, if we're going to make this happen, we need additional budget authority, which we would bring in the budget and back to the board to approve. This would give us that framework. It would give us the look at what we're likely to see happen, what might be a reasonable downsizing or path down, what happens right at the close, how do we figure out health programs, what are the incentives for people to stay when they're getting offered new jobs, and they have families and children that they have to take care of, sometimes parents that they also have to take care of. That's what this is. And this is in response to your request. There are several board members, Mary Adams, in particular, Alan Hoffa, in particular, Jan Ramers, in particular, all mentioned at board meetings the importance of making sure that we take care of our staff, but also that we make sure that we have a program that keeps our activities and the quality of our work as high as possible during this transition. So that's what this is all about. There was some concern about the letter in here, the sentence. It's in the second paragraph where it says staff requests that the board authorize the executive officer to implement programs and analysis as recommended by the consultant and approve any additional budget authority to carry out the program as indicated in the report. Well, that additional funding is only up to the $85,000 that's here, and some of that has already been authorized because we still have budget authority left in that initial $25,000. So total here is not a great big number, and it's all within it's actually all within the 100,000, but it's also within salary savings. Do I have that right, Helen? Chair, that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to respond to questions. I think we have Robert Norris, Helen Rodriguez that are here that can answer any more specific questions.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? Yes, Ms. Berkeley.
Yeah, I have a couple of, actually about 3 questions. My first one was when staff was hired, were they not told that sunset would occur in 2020, so there was a clear ending to when their work would be done?
Absolutely. Every single staff member, and it's included in writing and they're at will. That's absolutely correct.
Okay, just checking on that. And then also, on the incentives that are going to be offered, which I thoroughly understand the need for, the concern is that they not be adding to the PERS responsibility and FORA's increased PERS.
Absolutely.
So it will not be classified. It will not increase our PERS.
I don't have an absolute answer for you other than because we will be reducing the number of positions and they will be moving on, and we're going to try to reclassify our existing staff, we are not going to be adding to our PERS obligations.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then the last question was, has this gone through the Finance Committee yet? Has this been in front of the
Finance Committee hasn't been appointed. That's the next on the agenda.
So, okay. So this has not been through the previous Finance.
I'm sorry. This amount is within the approved budget.
Okay. I was just
But
checking
in
procedure.
terms of the future funding for the recommendations that are here, that'll have to go through Finance Committee review.
Oh, so this has been approved already. Okay. Apologies. Welcome. It's part of being new. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Adams.
Thank you. So, Michael and I have talked about this, and I just want to be absolutely clear. So, what we would be approving is a contract for $85,000 to RGS. And what we would be getting back then, is that going to be like a matrix of what the costs would be if we take the Salinas model as an example compared to another example or another example? So that when we make a final decision on what will be appropriate for the staff to retain them, and as necessary, perhaps even recruit additional staff, we will have the an absolute numbers to look at. As I read everything that's in here from the RGS report, my heart says say yes to everything, but my brain says you have to be a fiduciary responsible person, so you need to make a decision based on financial data. So that was my concern, that we were not approving the suggestions within the RGS report. We were simply approving the $85,000 to get a comparison report.
Robert?
Yes.
Thank you. Good. Any other board members with questions at this point? All right. Yes, Ms. Garfield.
There is on page 55, there's a statement that says it's unclear what FORA's retirement health plan commitments are. I thought we were very clear what FORA's post-retirement health care benefits were for staff, that the agreement was that there were none if when FORA ceases to exist.
Sherry, would you describe the subtlety there?
So, for retirees, FORA pays CalPERS on January 1st of 2020, and they pay for a full year. So there's a period of time, and that's the problem. From June 30th, 2020 to December 31st, 2020, we have prepaid it because CalPERS charges us on an annual basis. And I think that is the issue that they are referring to in that particular sentence about the issue that needs some clarification. It's a very narrow issue on that. But yes, everybody else understands that as of June 30th, 2020, nothing else for the ones that are not retirees as it stands today. That our ability to have healthcare coverage under CalPERS terminates on June 30th, 2020, and COBRA would end up kicking in for the statutory period of time for non-retirees. So there's a difference between retirees and non-retirees.
Okay, I'm just for uber clarification, make sure I understand. My impression was that people who have retired were getting health care benefits as retirees, and that benefit would cease to exist when FORA ceased to exist. And I'm getting a nod.
All of that's correct. The
Okay.
the subtlety here is that they
The
get
prepayment.
right.
Thank you.
All right. Weedy indeed. Yes, Mr. Gunter.
I was going to make a motion that we accept the report, that we authorize the $85,000, and we authorize the executive officer to implement the recommendations as they are now, with the caveat that there will be several finance meetings to talk about what's coming and how we're going to spend and divvy up the money that's remaining for the future, and that we can get these bills in line and figure out what they are, what we owe, and how we're going to do this. So we'll have to come back to the whole board for a decision.
I'll second that.
All right. Thank you. Motion by Gunter, second by Ramers. I'm going to go out to the public to see if there is any public comment on this item. I don't see anyone coming forward, so we'll close public comment. Any further discussion by the board on this before we vote? Yes, Mr. O'Connell.
I wasn't confused, but now I'm somewhat confused. Can you explain the process that got us to the point where we're talking about $85,000? Has it gone to the finance committee for approval or discussion, or will it go to the finance committee?
So the work that's done here, Helen, would you help me out with this a little bit?
Good, I'm glad to see somebody else.
We set funds aside in the budget last year for
Yes.
transition plan services, which included this.
Okay.
All right. So Helen, would you go ahead?
Okay, so we had set aside in the budget $25,000 for this fiscal year for RGS, and that has already been approved by the board. So RGS came back and they want to come and do a study for the transition as far by function as how to start downsizing. And that is what we had asked them to come back and give us an all-inclusive amount, and that is the $85,000. So what RGS has done for us preliminarily has met with the staff and addressed some of the concerns, and you've seen some of the concerns already in their letter. And so what they're asking for, what we are asking for, and the amount is already within this fiscal year's budget, is for the executive officer to execute the additional $66,000 this year, and that which I will include in the mid-year budget to be presented to the finance committee once it meets for the mid-year budget.
What, if I may, what is the 66,000?
That is what RGS anticipates to spend of the 85 for this fiscal year. The additional will be spent in fiscal 1920.
And that addition would be coming to the finance committee?
That will be coming to the finance committee and executive committee as necessary.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it goes both the finance and executive committee because this relates to compensation.
Can't wait.
I knew you'd be anxious.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good discussion. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. It passes unanimously. All right. That's the end of our business items. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on any item not on today's agenda? Oh.
I just
Yes.
have one comment for the board that you were asking about the finance committee. We've anticipating that you would approve the nominations to the finance committee. We've already contacted folks and we're already setting up the meeting. So it's scheduled for next Thursday. So we're moving right ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Great. All right. Just a second. Public. Okay. Go for it.
Okay. Hi, I'm Helen Shamble. I live out on East Garrison, and I'm just here to remind you guys that you have been working so long on this committee that some people have grown up from childhood to being able to vote, and others of us have moved from other parts of the world, like Santa Clara, into your beautiful valley. And so whatever your plan is, so for instance, for the east side, northwest, all points of the Compass Parkway, or indeed for Fort Ord in general, it might behoove you to do a little bit of outreach so that you don't surprise and frighten the people who have grown up thinking that Fort Ord was this thing over there, or are those of us who have just moved in here and have different conflicting views of what Fort Ord could be or what your committee should be doing? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public with comments on items not on today's agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Items from members. Ms. Schreiner, did I see your hand?
Yes, thank you. I just want to mention a few things on the part of Marina Coast and then ask for an agenda item. So bear with me for just a couple minutes. First, I hope everybody had a chance to meet our newest board member, Dr. Zefferman. He was here in the last meeting. Outstanding training as well as some really amazing life skills that include things like working on post-traumatic stress issues in Africa and building water projects in Afghanistan. I think it's really possibly valuable life experience and skills to bring to FORA. I also wanted to mention we have a complete urban water management plan as Marina Coast. It is updated every 5 years. Right now it is up to date. We are currently updating the water and wastewater master plans. We are creating a groundwater sustainability plan. We've been so fortunate in getting $1 million matching grant from the state. So 1 million will come from the state, 1 million will come from our community. We have been able to create a framework agreement along with the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We are also in the process of updating the strategic plan. I personally will be pushing for reduction of carbon emissions with consideration of climate change that we are all becoming very aware of through the extreme weather events we're experiencing. The district has also, of course, got a planning agreement with FORA and Monterey One Water. And part of that agreement with Monterey One Water, we're very much in favor of expanding the Pure Water Monterey as part of the district's regional urban water augmentation project. The expansion of an additional 2,200 acre feet per year would be recycled water and surface water. And one of my favorite things is it could be done with or without CalAm. But another one of my favorite things is December 11th, 2018, the State Water Resources Control Board announced a update to their policy to encourage recycled water use as resource to address effects of climate change. So it's a favorite of mine because they are now effecting policy based on climate change science. And the final bullet of their media release says one element of the policy is to set statewide goals to maximize recycled water use where groundwater supplies are in overdraft and where wastewater would otherwise be discharged to the ocean. So this is the state talking directly to us, right? This is the State Water Resources Control Board. You can find it at waterboards.ca.gov. And I just find it very remarkable, the timing, December 11th, 2018. So I would ask that we have a potential future agenda item here to include updates to these plans of the Marina Coast and progress being made on the service agreements for the city of Marina, for Monterey County, for Seaside, for Delray Oaks, and the city of Monterey. If that agenda item could come to fruition, I hope that people from the staff will work very hard to communicate to the Marina Coast General Manager the date of the agenda item for his own work plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members have items that they'd like to see on future agendas? All right, we'll discuss it with the staff, and we'll discuss it with the staff. Anyone else with items you'd like to see on the agenda? Okay, with that, then we are adjourned.